It's Mike Manning from the Firm Directory team. I'll be facilitating the call today and jumping in periodically to just pepper in some questions that we often get from clients. We're really excited about this webinar and even more excited that Vishal has taken the time to share her extensive experience around planning, implementing, and fostering adoption for expertise, location, and social collaboration initiatives. A number of our current and prospective customers have seen presentations from her in the past, and that's what in part led us to today's webinar, so Vishal could share best practices with them, and then of course the rest of the ILTA community. So she has a wealth of knowledge and has been directly involved with rolling out experience management and enterprise social solutions at KPMG, E&Y, and as well at Akerman. Vishal, thanks again, and please take it away.
Thank you, Mike. I hope I'm coming out loud and clear to everybody. Mike, we're going to have a full-packed agenda today. We're going to start from the CEO agenda and what it means, why it's so important to get to know the CEO's top issues and the business challenges of the firm, and then how they map and sort of align with your KM strategy for those of us who are heading knowledge management in our firms. And then once the priorities have been identified, what are next steps in terms of vendor selection, the implementation process as well, and the adoption plan. And then finally, what does good look like in terms of results and benefits. And as we go through the agenda, I should have started with saying thank you to Gail, the ILTA community, as well as Mike, you and your DESIC, for setting this up. And I just want to put a word out there to everybody who's attending. Please feel free to reach out. Mike was very generous with his introduction, but I've had a few years of rolling out the digital workplace, if you will, or enhancing it in the firms that I worked at. And I'm happy to share my experiences and lessons learned and so on and so forth. So with that, I will get started with the first item on our list, which is the understanding of the CEO agenda. So when you're looking at rolling out an enterprise social network, so that, I'll just sort of caveat, this comes in many shapes and flavors. So people call it enterprise social networks, digital collaboration, social collaboration, and so on. And we'll talk a little bit about, why some of those have different meanings for different people. But in any case, when you're rolling out something that enhances the digital workplace, it is key to think of yourself as a consultant to the CEO, to the leadership of the firm, because it is so important to identify the business problems that keep the CEO worried. He or she is going to be looking at the business with a very broad lens. And for you to understand and know the firm's problems are key to building the narrative that then goes into your planning, into your adoption for later on. Everybody is stretched in terms of information overload. And so if you're going to bring out one new tool, offer, even if it feels like a gift or an offering from you, something that's going to help them, people want to have very clear understanding of why, what's in it for me. And so it's important, it's key to have those issues at the top of your mind, so that you can then build a plan around it and pick the right solution accordingly. So some of the trends in the legal industry have started to point to obviously clients challenging the billable model, the traditional way of doing things, which has pushed the need for improved productivity. I don't think anything I'm saying here is news to anybody attending this webinar, but I'm just reiterating, because this is the list of issues that I had in my mind, or I was exposed to when I started to build a plan and a solution to tackle it. A lot of firms bring in lateral hires, but it ends up being a case of the revenue is not matching up to the expectation, because the promised book of business doesn't quite come through, or conflicts emerge, or what have you. So lower revenues than expected. If the assimilation is not happening as desired, or again, as expected, then we tend to miss a lot of cross-selling opportunities, work gets referred outside the firm, and so on. And in general, I think in today's environment where so many opportunities are available, the CEO does think and worry about the long-term development retention of his firm's or her firm's lawyers. And then while we're expanding, some firms have shrunk in post, this entire recession period, and some firms have grown through mergers and acquisitions. But how do you maintain the culture of trust, build camaraderie, and connection across the board? So that brings me to a quick view of what in management consulting is referred to as VUCA world. You've probably heard this term's been buzzing around for some time as well. We live in a business world where the dynamics are volatile, they're uncertain, complex, ambiguous, and they mean threats for a certain set of businesses. They mean opportunities for other kinds of businesses. So business models are being disrupted constantly. And again, what I'm sharing here is nothing new or that hasn't been reported on. But it's key to remember that whatever we do in terms of rolling out a knowledge strategy is very closely aligned to whatever issues the business is having in terms of surviving and thriving in the marketplace. So we know that lawyers are not able to bank on long-term client relationships alone. We know that a lot of work has started to shift from law firms to non-law firm vendors. There was a report by Thomson Reuters Legal Executive Institute and the Georgetown Law Center for the Study of the Legal Profession that essentially, it was a state of the legal market, and it was essentially saying in the last 15 years, we're at an all-time high for clients asking for RFPs, essentially indicating, look, we've done business with you for a long time, but that's not enough. We still need to now check you out against others. So when that kind of shift starts to happen, of course, realization rates are dropping, clients are getting savvy or just very economical and trying to unbundle legal services. So they'll chop it up and say, okay, this kind of stuff can actually go to, say, a Big Four because they do regulatory and compliance, and maybe we could give this to our firm. So the pie tends to get smaller or distributed in different ways. And client expectations have pushed firms to start to look at technology as a savior, or at least as a helper in driving value beyond the expectations. And sometimes they're not even clear what the client is expecting. We know they want more predictability of budget and so on, but sometimes they're also looking for the same kind of speed at which they've come to get accustomed to in transactions with, say, financial services, or they're banking online and so on. So anything that happens in another industry will also affect here, because customer expectations start to rise correspondingly. So in terms of mapping to knowledge management priorities and initiatives, as a knowledge professional, I think of my large priorities being connecting people to people and connecting people to information. And there are all kinds of benefits in terms of knowledge sharing, obviously, but learning, both formal, informal, and very importantly, also business development efforts, which are key to professional service firms. Now, in terms of the corporate IQ, like, do we think about what the corporate IQ is? How do we raise the intelligence? How do we know who knows what? We're not talking about how much, but who knows what, because that can be very tricky. And knowledge management has always been about raising the corporate IQ, the collective intelligence, and the ability to build on each other's ideas. So the big question is, can most firms afford to practice classic KM, the model where you have a team of people, they support at the practice level, or is your firm subject to market pressures and wants to do knowledge management and wants to do cutting edge knowledge management, but rather have the help of technology and not have to afford a lot of FTE count? So that's a question that every law firm has to answer individually, if you will, because their priorities may be different, their resources may be different as well, but that's kind of key as well. So as I'm going to talk about a technology solution, you'll see the human aspect of it as well, but it certainly does not need some of the classic KM approaches where you manually build, as in with people, build repositories of Q&As and so on and so forth. And I'll talk about that in detail.
Mike again here. Vishal, thanks a lot. Such good information so far. So at this point, we move into taking action. We on this side often hear from clients that there's maybe a little bit of ambiguity as far as where and how you kind of start the process. So I was wondering if you could share from your perspective where you started at Akerman with selecting the right vendor, the planning process, and how you're able to drive ultimately such a high rate of adoption in your firm.
Sure. So I guess, I could have probably created one more slide now that I think about it. So in terms of, identifying the top issues, as I mentioned earlier, of the firm, the top worries that the CEO has, and the business issues that they'd like to have addressed, the priority fell down to building a system that could connect people with people, quickly connect people with information, but on, in a manageable way, in a resource-friendly way. I don't want to say on a budget, but definitely in a more economical way. So it became very clear that we needed to bring in some kind of a technology platform. So with that, we started to identify and go sort of through the selection process with demos and so on. We identified the top 5 or 6 players in the marketplace that seemed to have the kinds of features we were looking for. And then we just used a scoring, just a normal protocol of scoring on a scale of 1 to 5, looking at the vendors and how they stack up against the criteria that were important to us. And we listed a whole bunch of criteria in the feature set as well, but some were more important than others, and so on and so forth. So as you'll see, and I've had personal experience with some of these vendors in other firms that I worked at, but these were some of the criteria and some of the vendors that we were looking at. And we ultimately settled with Neudesic. And the reason we went with Neudesic was that there was a functionality that was superior to what I was getting in some other tools, and that was more important to me. So in our firm, it was very clear when we ran the knowledge audit that the top need was to be able to identify expertise within the firm, who knows what, and it was also important to feel connected as the firm was growing very rapidly. As you know, 10 years ago, Akerman was a regional firm, and today it's a national firm, 24 offices, and so on and so forth. So it was very important to start to build a system that had some kind of a social connection where we could get to know people faster or at our pace, but in a way that was not disruptive, very friendly. So Neudesic had the unique combination of the firm directory as well as the Pulse product, and it also had the ability for us to brand it. So we actually went ahead and we created our own visual identifier. We created a brand name around it, and that actually helped us tremendously during the launch, because we wanted it to be a very clear indication of this is our modern foray, our entry into the digital workplace. So we were actually able to give it a name, create a visual identifier, and build, customize the layout based on what we wanted. So those features were key, and therefore we went with the new Desic product. Yeah, I think. Yeah, let's talk about the implementation. Thanks for that, Mike. You know, in terms of implementation, it is so key to remember that a lot of the planning, you know, when you're planning for the deployment of something like this, you don't treat it just like a technical implementation. That is very, very key. It is so easy to get swept by the idea, and this was actually a very I would say almost turnkey, you know, off-the-shelf kind of product. We did customize it. We did have to make sure, obviously, with the data imports and AD syncs and so on. But for the most part, it was very straightforward. And we wanted to make sure that there was a lot of focus put into what this was and why we were bringing it in. So a lot of the planning focused on the activities that were going to be done before the launch itself. So during the pre-launch phase, we actually had practice group leaders, office managing partners, other leadership come in, take a look. Now, lawyers aren't necessarily always up for beta testing. We weren't going to use them for that, but we wanted them to come in and take a look so that they could A, see it before everybody else did. I think that sort of holds a cachet of its own. But B, and more importantly, we could play out the narrative with them. And this is, by the way, the same narrative that was built on the points that came out of the discussion with the CEO. Those are the same points that actually end up building use cases, and I'll talk about that in the adoption, on the adoption slides. But it's the same narrative that flows with different people in different ways. So you take those narratives, make them talking points during the launch, but also to explain one more time to leadership, this was the issue, this is what we're doing about it, and this is how. People don't like to be told just to do something, especially not professionals with advanced degrees doing very sophisticated work. They need to understand the why and the how behind it, right? There's also some inherent bias against social networks in general. I actually posted a blog on LinkedIn today, and I realized to add that in was key, because we oftentimes forget, those of us who live in the world of digital workplaces, whether we're on the vendor side or the client side, we live and breathe that environment. So obviously we see the benefits of it, but they're not that obvious to a lot of people, and there is built-in bias to some degree, resistance to some degree, an idea that it may be too frivolous. So you need to make sure that you pull that back and explain why and how something like this actually connects people. And they may never have seen anything like this before. Most people are on LinkedIn, so they conceptually understand it. But even then, a lot of times they may just consider that a place where they have a digital presence in the form of a resume and a picture. So they may still not fully appreciate the connection factor, which is huge. The launch was a big deal for us. We had, as I mentioned, we created an identity. We called our platform Scout. We created a little visual identifier with it to go with it. We had a color palette that we used consistently. It came across as a very, almost like rolling out a website, like a very professional sort of rollout implementation. We had the same theme carry out in the posters that we created, and we stuck them up a week before the actual launch. We had created mini manuals, like 4-page, 4-sheet guides, if you will, in detail explaining what a social network is, how to behave online. We had rules of the road guidelines. And then also, for those who are uninitiated, what do like, comment, follow mean, and why would you use this, and how does it sort of work in a social environment? For those of our users who are very savvy, we had one-page cheat sheets as well. We created training videos shorter than 10 minutes, and this was easy. It's something you do on Captivate and some more software. And then there was a pre-recorded webinar, so people could hear it at their time. But when we rolled it out with a big bang. Road shows in every single major office, a lot of webinars, a lot of live presentations. It was not rolled out with an FAQ list and help desk answering most of the questions. So I think that's really a key. If I would to say to anybody what the most important takeaway would be, that's an important lesson and a key takeaway, that this is an ongoing investment of your attention. It's not a once-off project. And till it's not sort of established, and that could take a good 6 to 8 months, you want to be pretty hands-on and help people through, guide them, and then once they're confident enough, you can actually just check that off. They don't need to have retrainings. Once they get it, and they're very comfortable with it. But ongoing adoption is important. I know in some firms, that people talk about incentives to participate. The product that we rolled out with Nudesic, it actually came with gamification features, badges, and so on. I did not turn them on in my implementation because I felt that may be overwhelming for my particular audience, and I wanted to take it baby steps. But 6 months to 12 months after the rollout, when you have a decent adoption, and I would say a decent adoption is anywhere from 45 to 55% adoption in that period of time, you can start to introduce badging, and it'll almost sort of be like the second wind, and people will get excited about it, and perhaps you could even get the late laggards who were not early adopters. You could get them into it as well and get them excited. But the most important thing is to make sure that at least for a period of 6 to 8 months, those ongoing trainings are kept in full momentum. I had the experience where some people were very quick, so they got the basic features in the initial training and they were off to the races. Some needed basic training even after a few months, but you could always layer it up with basic and advanced and offer it to people, so that it's also a very feature-laden system. So people may, just like your cell phones, figure out how to make a call first, and that's good enough, and then slowly start discovering other features. So it's key to keep revisiting the trainings as well. They may not have heard something in the first go around, and they may want to pick up on it. Brief trainings, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, offer one-on-one coaching. For senior leaders of the firm who are interested and in there, make sure that there is a little bit of a reverse mentoring going on as well, very gently, but effectively bringing them into the loop. They may not have the patience to sit through training with everybody else, but they can certainly benefit from one-on-one coaching. All right, adoption. So this is my this is my favorite bit, and what I'm going to do in the next few slides here is talk about how the ongoing adoption was sustained. So I talked about the narrative, the talking points from the initial conversations, as well as the same actually fuel your use cases, right? So when we were in talks with Nudesic, and you'll see I have a slide later on of the communities we initially set up. A lot of that was built around what we heard during the knowledge audit, during eventual conversations. We understood the broad use cases, and the use cases feed into the narrative and vice versa. And as more and more people got on, once we went past critical mass, we realized how different people started to use it, even beyond the initial use cases or the initial ideas we had. So very simply, the firm directory that Neudesic has, it's a LinkedIn-style in-house expertise directory. Prior to bringing this in, we had a SharePoint-based. We did have a search capability by various criteria, but the firm directory definitely had some very cool features that we were not able to, and by cool I mean very, very functional, not just cool, it looks very smooth. It actually had some features that obviously we cannot replicate in SharePoint. So one of the features I know in terms of just looking for people from their views, you could look from their profile, you could actually look for people in the directory itself, but there's an ability to search by criteria, but also an ability to pivot or to cross view. And in the age of data visualization, where we're very, I sort of say, expectant of visualization everywhere we go. That was a very neat feature. I thought that you could go ahead. This is obviously not a demo of Neudesic. For that, you'd have to talk to Mike or somebody else at Neudesic. But they could show you how that pivot feature works. It was just a very visual, very easy to use way of looking for other colleagues that are either related to a specific area of law that you're looking at, went to a certain school or worked at a certain firm, and other criteria as well, admitted to bar in a certain state, so on and so forth. On the social platform, we found lawyers, seasoned lawyers, talking about specific question and answer. So this is your very typical, every law firm has the pardon the interruption or excuse the interruption kind of emails going around. We brought all of that into this platform, and with the idea of making it a searchable repository. So if somebody's asked a question today, if somebody else has the same question 4 months from now, it is something that is searchable, retrievable. You're not reinventing the wheel all over again. But what I found cool was, in terms of seasoned lawyers, we know law firms tend to be a little bit of a hierarchical organizations. What I found was conversations that may have otherwise taken place only between two lawyers in a hallway, on a phone call, in an email, at the water cooler, whatever it is, were now taking place on this platform. And the benefit of that is to younger lawyers who may otherwise not be privy to those kinds of conversations. And from a knowledge management perspective, I can tell you that that is a huge learning opportunity, learning in nugget size, and not sitting through a 2-hour course for a CLE or what have you, but it's a little nugget of information. In the learning world, it's known as nano learning or micro learning, but it comes to you in little snippets. And it's invaluable. The only other substitute for that is, making sure you listen in on everything that the lawyers are saying, which is impossible. So we use technology in this sense to scale up, connecting people. So this is great, Mike. Thanks for this slide. So this is the feature I was talking about in terms of being able to look for people by various criteria. We don't have a slide in here that shows the pivot feature, but that's a very cool, second slide that goes with this. Very, very cool feature in terms of cross-viewing across the board. Like I said, expertise location was a key requirement, a key business need that people identified during the audit. All right, so here's another, here are another couple of examples of how I used what, say, there was a leader of the pack, somebody who went ahead, my favorite early adopter. So the practice group leader who first announced, literally the day this was launched, she announced that I'm going to use this platform for all my practice group communications. I'm not using email anymore because that's double the work. And that obviously is a very smart thing to do because A, that brings her closer to the practice. It helps new hires into the firm, new joiners, to ramp up very quickly, because usually if she were to send a message, she would use the email vehicle, obviously. But if you're new to the firm, there is no way you can actually go back and see what she may have said or posted 2 months ago, right? Because your email starts the day you do at the firm. So, and I had evidence, I had proof from people who joined and who'd come to the training, and they said, you know, for my first week, I went onto the platform, I went onto Scout, and I looked at what everything that was being said there, everything that the practice group leader had posted, and it gave them a very good sense of the tenor of conversation, of the cadence of work, the pace within that group, and that's invaluable. There aren't enough hours in the day to get people oriented very quickly on there, especially when they're joining a new firm. And so now, again, this is another example of building the repository of comments, but also question and answers that we could search for in the future down the road. This is a quick slide. We don't need to hover over this for too long, but this is a slide, a quick example of the question and answer back and forth. We thought it would be helpful for you to actually see how the conversations are taking place. For those of you who are familiar with any social network, this will look very, very familiar. It'll look very similar to that, but we just wanted to make sure you actually got a chance to see this, and all of this becomes searchable content. And I just want to say one thing before Mike moves to the next slide. There's a fantastic McKinsey report called Unlocking the Social Economy and Using Social Tools for Improved Productivity. And I may not be getting the exact title, but the top of the title is Unlocking the Social Economy. So the key thing that they talk about in there is how these messages now become content, and not just content, they become searchable content. And Neudesic actually has a very good search engine. So all of this becomes searchable content. That is very, very key and a differentiator because we are not able to do that in email. We're able to search the email that's come to us, that's been included, that we've been included on, but we're not able to actually search en masse in this way unless you have a very expensive search capability in your firm. So this sort of takes care of that problem and is able to break down silos between practices, groups, offices. You can jump in various communities. We'll talk about communities in a minute, and look at conversations happening in various communities. Very, 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 very key in tapping into the tacit knowledge in the firm. All right, so there's that community slide I was talking about. So I apologize, it's a small, very sort of almost blurry image, but this is just a quick view of, we created 103 communities. We started off with 35 communities on the day of launch. Within the first 6 months, we created a total of 103 communities. And you know, the initial communities were easy. There was one community for every practice group, one for every office. Just your very natural, it's following the natural organizational structure. But then remember where I said we heard a lot of use cases initially where people struggle to find this, or how about that? And we started creating role-based communities. So we had one for paralegals, another one for legal admins, and so on and so forth. So people could actually share tips and tricks, questions amongst themselves based on their role. And that's also very key. I think sometimes we tend to put a lot of attention on the lawyer's needs and their need to ask questions and answers. But sometimes there's a lot of productivity to be gained amongst the non-lawyer staff, right? The professional staff, the rest of the employees in the firm. We also ended up creating a lot of, I don't know if it's clear enough for everybody to see, but there's a part in the interruption group on here as well. That sort of would be the place where people would add their questions. I do see a question. I'll address it later on. Somebody named Holly just asked, do you look at users creating their own groups? I'll answer the question later on. If I don't, make sure I make sure you don't let me go. But we did have a central governance model for this particular community management program on purpose. It was a new program. We wanted to make sure that people understood the basics, the mechanics, before we let them get away with it. Maybe I'll answer it here real quick and break my own rule. But yes, we did consider having people create their own communities, and very deliberately said no to that. We wanted to make sure that people, A, understood the mechanics, got comfortable with it, but B, and very importantly, wanted to make sure that the leadership was not under any kind of impression that this was something very trivial or a time sink. In speaking to people, I know people would come up to me and say, could we have a garage sale board up there, one for every office or every kind of garage sale, whatever, like sort of a bulletin board for sales and so on and so forth. And to begin with, I said no, and actually till the end, I said no, we're not creating that, not till people actually use this as a business tool, so that people would understand that there is an actual business objective that is being met here, whether it's peer-to-peer learning, whether it's knowledge sharing, whether it's building a searchable repository of Q&As without a lot of FTEs doing it manually. So no, we kept the governance tight on purpose. I've had knowledge of, just from experience from KPMG, EY, and knowledge of how it was run in Accenture and Deloitte as well. Wherever there was a decentralized governance model, especially when people went down the path of tools like Yammer, it got out of control very fast, and then it was a very detailed effort to actually rein it back in. So I can get into detail about that later on, but let me move forward with other ongoing adoption. And again, what did we do in terms of, there's a really nice, and you know what, Mike, maybe we can show people the next slide because it's a better visual than the text I've got here. So, one of the groups we did create was a celebrations group, and we said, this is a place where people can upload pictures from the local holiday parties, charity drives, and so on and so forth, local events. And we got a lot of uptake on this group. So obviously people do this in their personal lives with Facebook, Instagram, so on. So this was not very complicated. And so people did this, and it built a lot of camaraderie and I would do a monthly report, and at the end of the report, there was one section I would devote to most liked posts. It would always be from the celebrations group, because it's something that people obviously relate to, everybody connects with. But it was a great way to bring people together. I know it sounds like something that may be on the HR's docket, but from a knowledge management perspective, it is very important that people feel connected to a larger community. If they do, they trust each other, they feel connected, they share. And to build that kind of knowledge sharing culture, you need such tools as well. The next slide here shows an example of how a legal admin in one office is asking a question, and somebody else from another office is sending in an answer, and then also somebody else saying, you just saved me a ton of time, and another one says, oh my God, I didn't even know about this, and they're all in the same sort of line of work and so on. So there were many examples of such peer-to-peer learning, and that is another key thing. I think if firms don't have or don't invest a ton of resources into training, you can at least benefit from what each of you know. Again, the collective wisdom and collective knowledge.
Vishal, so at this point in the process, so we're now launched. So as a KM leader, what do you look for in terms of measuring impact and ultimately success?
Yeah, so you know what, I would say there are a few things. A lot of people talk about ROI, right? Give me the return on investment here. Now, before we can even go there, I know I'll just say this, that in terms of I'll break this out into what does a successful implementation and adoption need, and then once it's happened, what are the benefits? So very key to remember that this is a change management exercise. This is not a technical implementation. As a matter of fact, the technical side of it is rather straightforward. But this is a change management and communications exercise, and we need to make sure that we have the hearts and minds of people captured and fully engaged and understood on what we're doing, why we're doing this. This is not a play toy. This is something that is meant to be used for business purposes. A lot of companies have such collaboration tools. They find it helps declutter their inbox, but B, it takes a different modality. There's a conversation element and a collaboration element that happens on this platform. Email has become, your inbox tray has become your action, your sort of, it is like your analogous inbox where you're working on every item as an action item. So to use that for communication and collaboration is sort of doing a disservice to your employees. And in terms of expertise directory, I'll go into detail about how that has benefited, how social has benefited our organization. So one of the key benefits, I would say, are business development, right? So the analysts that we had that were responsible for competitive intelligence and business development and marketing said right away they felt that this was a better way for them to be able to track people internally and be able to pull out connections. And this is, even though we've got our CRM, we've got interaction just like every other law firm, this is a better way for them to use and sort of view information from different angles. And that simply translates into a speedier reply rate, as well as it helps with your go-to-market plans, right? Another benefit is in terms of knowledge sharing. So you have this capability that is social in nature. You're using technology to scale up, build a searchable repository of Q&As without, frankly, assigning specific resources. For the advanced users, we got into conversations around tagging, because there's a feature on the product. Again, I'm not doing a demo for the product, so I can't quite show you that, but there's a there's a really cool excuse me, feature around tagging, and it's not tagging as in Facebook. We're not talking about facial recognition software. It's actually tagging for searchability to promote content. And for any of you who are interested on the search engine side and how it promotes content and helps bring out better search results, that was a very, very key feature, at least from my perspective, in terms of not having conversations or comments getting buried, but the most relevant ones coming up top. That's not something I could train people on day one. It was too much. It was overload. But people, once they got familiar with the platform, they understood what tagging and what promotion of content meant. So there was definitely a use for that very key feature. And again, from a KM perspective, I would say the just-in-time learning aspect is cannot be underestimated. We're all hurried. We're all running around. We all want our answers quickly. And this had benefits for people at various levels and for our entire firm as a whole. So with that, I will wind down and make sure that there's some room to respond to the questions that have been coming in. But please remember, a community program is a long program. And it's not a straightforward linear implementation. There are twists and turns, but overall the result is a more networked organization. So Gail, Mike, I'll hand it back to you guys, and I'll let you send the questions my way so I can answer them.
Okay, great. Well, thank you to both for the great presentation, and once again, Nudesic for sponsoring. Okay, what I'm going to do right now, I'm going to launch our polling. These are the evaluations, so please take a few seconds to complete, and then we'll get into our Q&A. If you haven't entered any questions, please do so in the Q&A box. And I'd like to mention that, once again, the link to the recording will be posted on our website in a few days. Okay, we do have quite a few questions, so we'll get started on the first one. Some firms are not ready for social yet. Can they start with expertise, location, and firm directory?
Yeah, absolutely. That would be actually a very good way to start. I will say this, that that'll serve the unique purpose of supporting business development and finding people, across the firm. It won't have the social element, which does add a little bit more sort of a human touch. But yes, absolutely, the firm directory in and of itself is a good, strong product as well.
Okay, we do have a question. What user groups were included in the assembling your criteria?
Well, we started from the leadership. We talked to everybody from paralegals to legal admins to younger lawyers, associates, new joiners, especially coming from different firms. We talked to various groups of people and tried to understand, when they come in, where do they go looking for information? What are their biggest stumbling blocks? How could that be easy? And then obviously also just observing current behavior. Where were people going right now? Just looking at the stats, quietly monitoring the PTI emails. But in terms of user groups, they were across the board.
Okay. Our next question. On the flip side, some firms are looking just to add a social initiative. Would you recommend that they tie that to a people expertise and discovery?
I would say that, and maybe I'm biased because I did it that way, but I was yes, because there's maybe an intangible, but there's definitely a more human and real aspect to the social side of it. And by marrying it's very seamless once you roll out, we had one menu on top, and you just clicked, you didn't do Pulse and Phone Directory, it was all branded under our name. So we would just say, find people, or start a conversation. So it was a very seamless way to switch between the two. I would say you could do social on your own. I tend to feel that the firm directory gives you a sticky factor. It gives you a functional reason, another functional reason for people to come here. Even though collaboration is a much touted concept, and businesses realize, if you look at the business world these days, I didn't have this very cool graphic, but there's something out there on the collaboration economy that talks about how businesses function today, right? You book a room with Airbnb, you book a cab with Uber, and what you're relying on is social currency. You're expecting somebody else has rated the driver, rated the room, rated the renter with positive comments, and so that's good enough for you. And if you have a good experience, you go back, reciprocate the same way. We work and live in a world of social currency, whether we call it that or recognize it as such or not. So I'm a proponent of social in a big way. However, I will still say that in the enterprise setting, people can oftentimes be a little bit reluctant. I would hear a lot of sort of skepticism, even within the legal industry peer group. But I'm a proponent of it because I think it is the way people can benefit, at least in terms of connecting with each other in ways that they couldn't earlier. So yes, you could do one without the other. The two together makes the whole experience, the whole platform, more sticky. So I would say that would be another good reason to do them together.
Okay, our next question. How do you deal with copyright, confidentiality, and security issues?
Very good question. So we had, and so I don't know if anybody missed this bit from Mike in the introduction. I came from Big Four before I joined the legal industry. I was in KPMG and EY, so a very good, thorough understanding of regulated industries. So we created something called the Rules of the Road. Very simple but specific guidelines, 5 lines, nothing more than that, that listed out what we expected people to do. Now, in terms of, we weren't telling them ask only these kinds of questions, but we were making people very aware. So very good question about copyright. So one of the rules of the road actually says, always make sure you're compliant. If you're sharing something, you read a neat article, people do this all the time in LinkedIn, don't obviously copy paste the article in there, share a link. So most websites will have a deep linking policy that will allow you to share it in this way, as long as you're not making commercial profit from it. So we made people very aware that they were not to do that. They were obviously not to share anything client confidential or sensitive within the company up there. So if somebody's got a gripe with how much they're paid, or Susie doesn't like Tom, you're not putting stuff like that up there, obviously. All of that is sensitive information. And you could ask questions around your client work, but obviously not share anything that you've learned in confidence from the client. So that was made very clear and reiterated. And to be very honest, we do this every single time I've rolled out a social in other firms as well. Every time we do this, we're very cautious. I have yet to see an egregious sort of conduct in that regard, but we don't take it lightly. We do make sure that people understand it is still electronic, it is still e-discoverable, so be very careful what you put down in writing.
Okay, we've got several more questions. The next one is, what approach did you take to capturing people's individual knowledge areas and then sharing with others who knows what?
So within the expertise directory, within the expertise directory, which directly correlated to profiles of people. So maybe I should explain it in this way. One half of it looks like your LinkedIn profile, right? So you have your skills, your areas of knowledge, your college degrees, and so on and so forth. And then there's another half, which actually doesn't exist on LinkedIn, but it's a search engine. It's simply a list of everybody in the firm, and you can search by various criteria. In terms of capturing skills, for our lawyers, we had a very solid body of information pre-existing. So we did not have to create that with this program. We had that homework was done in advance. But our professional staff, everybody who was not a lawyer in the firm, did not have a profile. And this platform was democratic. It was open to the entire firm. So for everybody else who was not a lawyer, who didn't have a client-ready profile and areas of expertise already, we did go down by department and put together a list of skills for each department. So people would actually go in and list their skills and expertise. So this platform is meant to be for everybody in the firm. You're an LAA, you're a paralegal, you're experienced, where you went to school, what you know, what are your top areas of expertise. All of that was captured. For the professional staff, we gave them the ability to do it themselves with the training, with the requisite training. What we could fill, we filled, but I'm pretty sure this is not an exception. Most law firms don't have profiles on their professional staff. They usually just have them for their lawyers. So we didn't have any sort of body of information that we could automatically import.
Okay, great. The next question, how large was your implementation team?
The implementation team was myself and a technical manager in our IT group. We also had a designer who did all of our sort of the branding aspect and the various, you saw the community logos and such, so she did tremendous work with that. But that was it. That was the implementation team. I did heavily lean on all my leaders, and I had some very fantastic leaders who then were my ambassadors and sort of carried on the work for me, became my mouthpiece for me in their respective offices and their practice groups and so on. So, but the implementation team was only me and the technical manager in our IT group.
Okay, how is what you did different from how IT departments might approach this problem in terms of build versus buy?
All right. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if, well, this is, I know what I did, and I feel like that may be a little bit different than how IT departments might do it. I've seen a lot of rollouts where it is treated as a technical implementation, an FAQ script is given to the help desk, and we're like, okay, we're off to the races. And I don't think that, and frankly, for a lot of tools, maybe that's plenty. You know, you've installed a new payroll system or whatever, T&E system. This system just needs to convince people more. So I think we need to have the change management, the communications, the full-on adoption, the narrative played back over and over again if necessary to people to make them understand why they should use it. So I think that is the only key difference that I would say is important to note. It's not just a technical implementation.
Okay, I think we've got time for 2 quick questions, okay?
Sure.
The next one is, did you use the Pulse product and Firm Directory or just the Firm Directory?
Both, Firm
Okay.
Directory and Pulse.
All right, and our last question, how do you counter objections that the tool could be duplicative of support provided by training department and or user support services?
Say that again?
How did you counter objections that the tool could be duplicative of support provided by training departments or user support services?
Okay, so if we're talking about technical training, you know, I want to make sure that this was, you know, across the spectrum. So lawyers are asking each other questions about licensing agreements and, you know, very specific nuances about clauses and things like that. So I'm not quite sure if, you know, all of that kind of stuff is necessarily covered. Is there canned information or canned training courses sitting on the learning management system shelf or by user training? They probably are, but a lot of the questions that are asked here are asked in a hurry. Sometimes people have some time, but a lot of times they're asked in a hurry and they want the answers very quickly. So I don't think they function in the same vein as a formal training program or something that is scheduled ahead of time, planned to sort of make sure that certain learning objectives are met, certain competencies are met, or certain, you know, if you're trying to teach somebody a certain tool, I think most training departments tend to focus on that. But this is not competing with that in any case. We could have, I guess, had a help desk community in the group as well. And then it would be another channel where people could have asked questions. But most of the questions that are answered here, I don't think a technical training group or a user support group is able to answer. I'm not even sure if a research or information department is always able to answer. They could maybe answer some of those questions, but not all. So I hope I answered that question. Whoever, I just want to put this out there. So if I didn't get your question right, I know this is a one-way street, so unfortunately you don't have the mic, but I'm on LinkedIn. There are not that many Vishal Agnihotris on LinkedIn, so feel free to reach out to me, ask questions. I'm happy to talk about my experiences after the webinar ends. And if, again, you didn't ask a question here but wanted to, feel free to reach out.
Okay, well, a big thank you. What a great presentation. One final note, if you haven't taken the, filled out the evaluations, please take a few minutes to go ahead and complete that. Thank you all for attending, and we look forward to seeing you guys on future webinars. Everyone have a great day.